A Conversation, Episode 1, Art and Architecture, an Education in the North.
Hello. This will be the first episode of the podcast. Today we're going to be discussing something which is kind of close to both of us, which is education, our experiences in education in the North. We both studied in Aberdeen. So we were going through this, we'll be talking about our experiences, the pros and cons, art scene in general, and kind of the direction we're going to be going in. So yeah,
Guess a pre-note before, just to mention that we're not qualified probably to talk about this stuff in depth, but we can only speak from our experience. So
Alright,
let's
yeah.
see how it goes.
Yeah, and I'm making an apology. We are all in quarantine right now. I apologise for my hair in advance. Dale's done the good thing of putting a hat on.
Joe Exotic.
We've went for it. Dale's got a mullet, so it's all good. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about education, and we'll be doing more episodes. We'll be going into very specific topics, maybe about an architect or an artist that we both enjoy, parallels between them, maybe just something, an idea, whether that's beauty or we want to look at brutalism or whatever it is. But for the first episode, we're going to be talking about education. So, as a starter, we both studied in Aberdeen, and I guess
Yeah, we can just go through our
Yeah.
story, I guess, is the best
Yeah,
way to
I'll,
describe it.
I'll start, I guess, because we've got very different paths. So, when I was at school, we'll start there. I didn't study art at all. I didn't study art at all. I didn't know what I wanted to really be. I was at one point wanted to be a dentist. I was looking at engineering. I even applied to go into engineering at Aberdeen and had an offer and stuff happened there. But then I left school, and I think I had an interest in drawing at the time. I was doing a lot of illustration. And I went, okay, I want to study art, but I had no art grade at all. But I was interested in art, and I'd looked at some art history. I ended up going to college in Aberdeen, where my brother was already studying. Well, he was at university. I went to college to do a portfolio year, and I spent 3 years there, got my HND, and that led me going straight into third year at Grace School of Art in contemporary art practice. But I had offers for painting as well. So we can go more into that, but you have a different path. Yeah.
Probably mine's more traditional than yours, and probably important to say that me and Dean have both graduated now,
Yeah.
and Dean finished 2019, same year as me. I've got a master's in architecture from Scots Southern School of Architecture in Aberdeen, and Dean's got his bachelor's from Grace School of Art in Aberdeen. But my story is kind of a little bit more traditional. I'd always kind of known, unlike Dean, what I wanted to do. And I guess that's kind of important because I'd always been fascinated with the built environment.
Right.
My parents have always, and relatives have always been involved with it. Dad's a carpenter, a joiner, and so I'd had a little bit of experience labouring when I was about 14, which always excited me. But I guess I was kind of a really sporty kid growing up, and I enjoyed a lot of sports, and was interested in stadiums, and so I remember always wanting to design a stadium, which now after education I don't think I would ever want to do. But yeah, I studied local high school like Dean, both went together, then moved up to Aberdeen, got into university on clearance, which is quite funny. I didn't actually meet my conditions, which is probably something we can talk about a little bit later on, and the importance of these kind of ideas now in university. But I just ended up in Aberdeen, which along the journey proved to be quite a good thing, I think, to me, because it's a very different school than maybe what you would find in the central belt of Scotland even, and definitely what you would find down south in England.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know if we want to discuss
Well,
our
I think-
experience.
Yeah, well,
of
experiences, I think, is a good, so we kind of know why we got there, but I think, that's a good point, talking about the differences, because we both studied in Aberdeen, and it's the north of Scotland, so we need to talk about that, like what it's like to study in the north, what it's like to study kind of away from the art world. I say the art world, and when I talk about that's a term to coin terms. But it kind of encapsulates architecture as well, and any form of art form. But it's a separated place, Aberdeen. So yeah, we talk about our experiences there. So as I say, I went to college, and I had a really great lecturer at one point. His name was David Downey. Shout out to David. He really got me, I guess, turned on to art. I got really excited about it, which was a weird thing because I was enjoying looking at painting, and I was enjoying doing sculpture and installation work. And I think I should preface that I am a painter and a sculptor, and I do dabble in installation, but I'm mostly a painter and sculptor, and that's what I'm primarily focused on. And I was doing it. I was kind of getting along with it, and I had a deep interest for art theory and history, and I think I was kind of starting to go down that line more than actually the practice. And I was kind of coming disheartened with being in Aberdeen, which is something we'll kind of go into. But David really turned me back onto it. He was engaging with me on an intellectual level. He was talking to me about art, about theory, about why people make art. At the time, I was really interested in the British painters, the figurative artists of like Soho, like Bacon, Freud, Urbach, etc. Anyway, after a while, I really fell in love with paint. Like really fell in love with painting, with sculpture, and then I applied to Grays, and David put me forward for third year. So I got into Grays, and I could have moved away. I could have went to Dundee or to Edinburgh and Glasgow. I applied for all of them. But I ended up going to Grays because I was already in Aberdeen and my brother was there, and I don't know why. I just kind of felt like I'll just stay here. There's no other reason that I'll just stay here, see what it's like. I always wanted to go to an art school, so I went to art school, and that leads into, I guess, the equaling out here is that Dale was already at Scott Sutherland, an architecture school, and I was going into an actual art school, not college anymore.
I think that's quite nice because we were both living with each other at the time.
Yeah.
And obviously, we moved from Forth, our hometown. It's about 50 miles south of Aberdeen, give or take, something like that. So we both moved up, and this was a kind of the independence moment. But we both lived together, and I think our relationship has always been intertwined while living with each other and studying on maybe 2 separate occasions, but maybe 3 if you count the time I slept on your sofa for about a month. But
that happens.
Yeah, it's always been important. But like Dean says, I think it's good to discuss this point of Aberdeen being on the kind of peripheral idea of schools. So in the UK, it's the most northerly school for architecture, and
I believe for art, I think there's smaller art schools, but not this. Not when you think about a big faculty of like a university, a place to go study art, a big art school.
Yeah,
Grays is the most northern school.
It's quite a strange idea to be, Aberdeen's 60 miles north of Dundee, for anyone who wants to know the geography of it, because the distance is kind of something you kind of focus on eventually when you get through the school. So Dundee's 60 miles south, and then even further south than that you got Edinburgh and Glasgow, which would be known as the Central Band.
Belt,
And then 540 miles south of that was probably the epicentre of what you would class as culture for creatives in London. So to think about it, we're very much on the marginal area of the UK for learning.
Right.
And the school, I think, as you get through it, it definitely teaches you the praises of that, rather than, I think, at undergraduate, you might not have felt it, but in the architecture school, you definitely didn't feel a particular prestige about the school you were studying at, or you didn't really think about it too much. You just thought you'd got into an architecture school, and you were studying architecture, and all schools were equal, and this idea, but it's definitely something that came up as you went up the school. Definitely something to discuss at master's level.
Right.
But
So we were both there. So I guess we can talk about the pros and cons about studying in Aberdeen, in the north of the north, as I would call it. If you think about Dundee being north, we're further up than that. We're kind of on our own. And the funny thing there as well is that the art school, where I studied Grey School of Art, is actually it's the furthest part of the Robert Gordon campus, and it is kind of completely separated from the rest of the campus. It's in the middle of the woods, basically, which is interesting because the Scott Sutherland building used to be right beside it. It moved away to the new building, the Syrian Wood building.
In my third year, I think, so I did 2 years undergraduate in the old Scots building, which neighboured the Grey School of Art,
which we call the Annex.
Which is an old kind of post-war beast of a building attached to the Scott Sutherland Schoolhouse. So it's kind of had beautiful spaces in it, but it was busted up. So we got some new facilities in
And Grays was supposed to move and never did. So it's kind of just almost on its own. and that's an interesting place to start. So at Grays, it's a very much what I would call a separated experience. In that Grays, you're not really intertwined with a lot of the other schools. You're not walking around seeing people. If you're in Grays, you're with artists or people studying the arts, whether that's painting or contemporary art practices. We bundle that all together now. We don't really have separate courses. Well, we do, but not in the same way. So yeah, if you sculpture, printing, printmaking, painting, whatever it may be, that's contemporary art. And then you have your painting, which is like the other side of the school, and you have some graphic communication, etc. Yeah, so you're surrounded by artists the whole time. Now, I skipped out first and second year, but I was there for 2 years. I saw first and second year happening, and at the time I was in a relationship with someone who was in first year, so I got to experience that through her, and then also through other people that just knew that were there. So, and also people talking to me about what their experiences were like in first and second year and third year. So yeah, the pros of working there, I think, is really interesting. You have a very intimate relationship there, and it's not competitive in the same way that I know Glasgow and Edinburgh can be very competitive schools.
Yeah.
Not just to get into, but when you were there, there's a sense of the built environment around you, all the art galleries, the collectors, and this is making it sound like this big monopoly of like, oh my god, look at all these people that's going to buy my work. It's not like that, but there is a greater understanding of trying to push into the, without going commercial as in painting, I don't know, a cow or something, like the commercial side of the art world, the big galleries, the pursuit that a lot of people are going after. That's really at the forefront of Edinburgh, London, Glasgow, your bigger cities in the UK. Aberdeen's not really like that, in that you don't have big galleries, you don't have a lot of what you call art collectors. You have this weird intimate relationship that everyone kind of knows each other in the school. It's kind of like a big family.
Dysfunctional.
That also means people, that also means people fall out and don't agree on everything. But yeah, you're surrounded by a beautiful environment, and the school's basically in the middle of the woods by a riverbank.
The River Dee.
The River Dee, yeah. And there's a sense of nature in Aberdeen as well, and that you are north, and I don't want to say push you to make work about the environment and nature, but there is a sense of that there, where there's a very specific kind of art that goes down well, maybe with the lecturers a bit, but with the locals. If you're doing really, abstract post kind of like modern, like simplistic work, people will be quite confused. If you do landscape painting or shipyard painting, whatever it may be, yeah, it translates really well, because that's what people are surrounded by. That's their environment, so they
it's the market almost.
It's the market.
It's also the understanding, yeah.
And I guess we want to get some prawns. Talking about the fishing industry. The pros of the architecture school, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would probably describe it in two parts, because you have the undergraduate 2-hour study, which is then broken by a year out working, and then the master's study, which is a 2-year course. So I was at university for 6 years, if you include the year out, which was really quite a long time. It's quite a long time to be institutionalized, I guess.
Yeah.
So you definitely feel the change when you leave, which I think we'll try and discuss before the end of the podcast, with the kind of what we felt from education, the things, if we were to do it again, maybe we would change, or things we think would work better at university from a completely educated now, I guess, in the sense that we've been through it, but in the sense that we don't really know all the background stuff that happens at university, but you can see the foreground stuff and how it affects students. But just to get into the pros and cons, I guess, of studying at the Scott Sutherland School, the school itself is great.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was in masters, I found out by going down to a conference with Hugh down in Birmingham, where a lot of the schools met up, that you don't really get a much better studying environment. Everyone gets their own desk at Scott Sutherland School from first year till final year. You get your own locker, so everyone always has a place, and they always have a place to pin up, which is kind of I guess it's an old school idea in places where now they're hot desking and you don't have a desk. So the facilities are great, and I always found that throughout the school they've always been good.
Right.
And that led to a very, very good studio culture. I felt, like you say, the family aspect, and I think everyone would argue that they have a family at university.
Yeah.
But at the Scots school, I mean, we don't have a big first year intake, maybe 60 people, 70 people, and that windows down to about 25, something like this in the final years.
Right.
So it's a big dropout rate as normal, but you really get to know people over 6 years, and the studio environment was fantastic towards the end, where you're kind of living in the studio, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
But the people that are there along the ride with you are great. So undergraduate was good that way. And I guess the style of learning is definitely a pro of the school, where, like Dean said, I think the pressure is off you a little bit to not, the competitive, it's there but it's not there, if you know what I mean. You want to do good because you're a normal human with a competitive edge, and you want to be at the top of the class kind of thing.
Right.
But there's no pressure there from tutors or anyone. Really, you can kind of sleepwalk your way through the first 3 years of uni, I think, at the Scots Southern School, and not really get too invested in it. The competitiveness, maybe, I don't know, you become more aware of it in masters. But undergraduate, I think one of the pros is definitely that you don't feel the insane pressure of maybe going to a school like the Bartlett in London, which is obviously the best school in the UK according to the AGA. But I mean, I really appreciate the freedom in the studio that we got, and the pressure you didn't feel from your peers. You know, you didn't feel you had to hide your work, or someone was going to copy you or something weird like this. Because I feel this is always a thing that comes up at, like, students when they talk about it. It's like, oh, they saw that and, you know, they copied me, and it's like everyone's learning. The same ideas are always going to come out because the tutors are going around are always going to speak to the same people, and there's only so many ways you can do something.
There's also the understanding that when you're studying, you're not some famous architect or you're not a genius. And if somebody does a similar work to you, or even copies you, it's not like that work was going to be, you know, getting built. It's not like this thing that you did is going to be the next Guggenheim, or, you know, it's a bit of it's a bit of theory. I mean, if somebody makes a painting that looks like you're painting, or a sculptor that looks like your sculptor, so what, man? That's not the piece that's going to define your career, and you're certainly not making a, you know, there's nobody coming out and screaming at the top of their voice that this is this incredible masterpiece. It's just, you know, you're working your way, you're working out the kinks. Everyone is. Yeah. Everyone is. So
it's definitely a laudable quality of the school. I think that people can band together and maybe approach the subject of learning in that way, that you don't feel that someone's trying to copy you or they're trying to nick your ideas, which is a very strange thing that all students kind of have, I feel, when you speak to them. And that kind of gets teased out of you by the masters. But I guess I'll quickly get through undergraduate, which is one con, is that I felt like the lecturing was great. I had a great tutor in first year, Graham McRobbie. He really knew what he was doing. He sadly passed away when I was at uni. But everyone else at undergraduate, and I think it's when you get to postgraduate, you understand that they're not really wanting you to be great theory. They don't care what your design is. They really just want you to have, like, the basic skills you need to go into a workplace, which is something that never gets told to you. But I think if you were told that at undergraduate, you would be much more relaxed. Some people get so caught up in the idea that they're great designers in the second year of university, and that they sit with 7 weeks with nothing, and they're trying so hard to build something beautiful, and really they just want to see you draw, I guess, is that just try something. Which I feel like that's one of the cons of working in a school like this, is they're maybe not harsh enough to you if you're not doing work.
Right. And
just do work, I think, is something that someone needs to hear.
I'll get onto that. That's my experience as well. I'll get onto that in my cons in the art school as well. But have you got any other?
I just quickly mentioned that I guess I worked my year out, which all students do in Aberdeen. I worked at middle to small size practice, so it did really good, big work, a big varying work, a good portfolio at MRT Architects.
Right.
Who again I had a second stint with when I finished my masters. So I have actually worked in the north of Scotland, which is kind of an important thing that we'll maybe talk about in the next segment. But I then ended up returning, quite a traditional route, returning straight to university, and I picked up a lot of skills from a year out and went on to proceed to do a two-year master's study at Scots Southern School.
Right.
With a much smaller group of tight-knit friends and a change of lecturers into much more, I don't know, let's say smaller groups, much more defined units in a field of study as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, well,
I could finish on that, but
yeah, I wouldn't say that was Collins, but
a con. Oh, well,
yeah, I'm not trying to get him to bad talk his school or anything. That sounds good to me. You know, a smaller tight knit of people that really want to make good work.
Definitely.
You don't have to. It's okay. I'll have my cons. I'll fill up the space. No, I'm not. It's not gonna be that bad. Yeah. So I guess I said some pros of working at Grays, and we'll get into more of this in reflection because it's not so much cons. This is more like
improvements.
Yeah, I will get into it in more. I'm not going to say a lot of things because a lot of it's going to come up in reflection, and I wouldn't exactly say it's a bad thing. Straight up, I think there's a lot more that goes into some of it. So I'll just straight up say the cons of like what I would see as a bad thing. One of the things I'll say is going into third year, you had a thinning out process of people dropping out. This isn't for them. I think it's extremely hard to fail at art school, especially when the environment built isn't competitive in nature. So you can kind of, as Dale was saying, you can kind of sleepwalk. Well, that really applies to art school. And that I'm not meaning about meeting grading criteria or something like that. I'm meaning as in the function of you in the school. So like how invested you are in your own work. There's a lot of people there that just seem to be just being there for the sake. Some of the people I've spoken to, and this is across all years. This isn't just my year. It's like they don't enjoy what they're doing, and I'm like, why are you doing it? But they won't get failed because you need funding, right? You need people, and that's not the point of the school. The school isn't really competitive in nature. So what you have for me going into third year was I couldn't believe how many people there were, and it ended up with a lot of us getting quite small studio spaces, and that was one of my cons, is that the studio spaces were really small in Grays, and that's not to say that there isn't space. It's to say that I think there's too many people. They take too many people. I mean, we had a year of like over 40 people, which is excessively large when you think about the fact that Grade School of Art, the actual school itself, isn't that big. You have 4 years of CAP, 4 years of painting, 4 years GraphCom, ComDes, 3D design, fashion, all in this little school. You have 4 years of each of them. And in my year alone, and you get smaller and bigger years, of course, but a class of over 40, I think it was at one point, anyway, is really big. And you get really small spaces, and for some people, it's quite hard. For instance, me, my experience is I'm a painter and sculptor, but I like to paint. So you'd think, well, why wouldn't you be up in painting? And there's definitely an argument to be made there. But in the painting spaces, you get quite large spaces. Spaces are really good. But for me to want to paint in a cap space is extremely difficult, and that you have a very small, like literally both years, my space was as big as this painting. That was the wall space I had to paint on, and I also had to have a desk there, and I was also surrounded by 4 other people. It's hard to work in sometimes. It's nice because you're always surrounded by people. You always have something going on around you, but it's hard to work in, and disparaging in terms of you don't want to be there. You want to, I wanted to just work at home. I would just rather draw at home or set things up at home and then come in and finish a piece or whatever. And that sometimes that gets hard because you're sitting at home and you don't want to, because you're at home, because you're comfortable. I'm the type of person that needs an environment to work in. If I just sit in my bed and I'm supposed to be working, I'll end up reading a book or playing the Xbox or watching a film. And that's just human nature. People can be lazy. But yeah, that was one of my biggest cons. Another one we can get into, and this is in adjustments and stuff, we'll talk about reflection, but just I think the amount of time you get with lectures, and the facilities are actually great, but the use of the facilities with guidance from lecturers on your work and using the facilities isn't so great. And that's not to say that lectures aren't good, because I think there are great lectures at Grades. I think the one-on-one time you would have, as I've talked about this before, and the idea of the postmodernist art, where the death of the artist and the apprentice kind of happened, and that you say so like an artist may have 3 apprentices, or now you have to think about it in CAP, and where I studied, you have a lecturer or 2 lecturers. Instead of having 1 or 3 people that they're teaching 43 people. Trying to give your time to each person who's working on a sculpture or whatever, and guide them through that process with the facilities, with your time, it's extremely hard. I understand that, but that's one of my, and that goes into the overcrowding, but just the amount of time you actually get to spend spend with your lecturers and the teaching aspect of it,
Mm.
although can be good, is minimal at
Yeah.
times. It's very minimal, and we'll get into this later. But that's kind of like a con, and that's not to say that the lecturing can be good. I think it can be great.
Mm.
So yeah, right, cool. So yeah, we were just leaving
Break.
off there on our magical cups of tea might have appeared again.
Sick editing.
The angle might be better as well. So, but working out the kinks here. But we were just talking about the studio environments and stuff. But before we go into kind of reflections and things that we maybe think could be done better across the board in schools or in our path forward, etc. Maybe talk about an aspect of like of really good lecturing and of those examples of good lecturing we're talking about, or our good time spent in our kind of final years. So you didn't really get to talk about your masters too much. So maybe if you could kind of go into that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think once you've finished undergraduate, it becomes much more clear the direction of architecture if you're interested in it, where you want to go with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's very much nurtured at the Scots Sutherland School. And this idea again reappears of critical distance of the north. And I guess the best thing about the school returning from masters is that it's not like an orthodox architectural education, in the sense that you do one project for 2 years as your thesis for masters at Scots Sutherland School, whereas at other schools, I think mostly when you come back for your 4th and 5th year, you do 2 separate projects for a year each, 2 semesters.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but we spent 2 years doing the same project, which gives an unbelievable amount of time to do it. And I was fortunate enough to go to a school which actually ran a unit under Professor Neil Gillespie of Brecon Hall, who's very much renowned in Scotland, I guess, for architecture.
Yeah.
But to me, this unit was kind of the changing point and what I really love about architecture, and really got me excited about architecture, like your David or in previous studies. We focused heavily on the everyday aspects and the importance of the ordinary things, which to me made a lot more sense than maybe looking at stuff that was coming out of London at the time. So we very much started to understand this idea of critical distancing at masters, which is taught very, very well, I think. Only at masters. I don't think it's abundantly clear at undergraduate why it's nice to study an architecture degree at the Scots Sutherland School, because you're so north. Whereas in masters, the trajectory kind of changes. You stop looking south for things that you think look nice, and you kind of cast your eye north to the marginal areas. So we studied 2 years in Orkney, which was a total change of pace. And in the end, we ended up going back to Orkney with our final presentation and interacting with the actual the population, the residents of Orkney, as well as some others. And I felt like it was a huge success, and I felt like I was making meaningful things in architecture. So to me, I felt like the master's level under Neil has possibly got one of the best reputations in Scotland. I don't know how big the reputation is, but I think it's taught unbelievably well.
Right. The actual reputation of it.
The actual idea of it as well, I think, is really good teaching. Which I think at other universities, there's a call for less time even to do your masters, saying, oh, why can't you do your masters in 1 year at uni? I mean, this is a debate, a conversation in other places, like, oh, it could be shorter. And I know some people might say the same at Scots, but to me, the 2 years on one project really hit home the amount of time you would actually spend on
a building.
An actual building. Yeah. You're not going to build something in a year. So, I mean, the up and down, the learning curve, everything is unbelievable, and the depth you get go, I felt like that was fantastic, which kind of paired hand in hand with what I felt was another fantastic thing in Masters, was the society that's run at the university, which was in its 30th year when I was there, and I was lucky enough to partner up with our other flatmate at the time, Hugh, and we ran as presidents.
Hugh Fish.
Shout out to Hugh Fish.
Yeah.
But we ran as presidents, and we ran this society which has been on the go for 30 years now, which is unbelievable, I think, in my estimation, that we have put on 18 lectures from not just national but international acclaimed architects. It's not a small feat, this society, what it's got and the backing it has. It has 140 members. I mean, that's a real membership to anything. And I think that's the most undervalued, under-publicized publicised, sorry,
Publicised, yeah. Publicised.
thing of the university is this fantastic society that really for me is that it was the crowning of the master's study. Like, the things I managed to do with that society is unreal, which I know you came along to a few of them and probably found them quite not even helpful, because architecture and art are linked, but education wise you can't beat getting people who actually do it in that are interesting.
I think to go into the art kind of side of that, we have guest at Gray's. I'm not there anymore, but we had guest at Gray's anyway. I don't know if we still have it. I'm sure we do. And I was always quite disheartened by guest at Gray's. Not to say that we don't have interesting guests, but it was the lack of scope, and that it's interesting to hear from a local artist, to hear the perspective of what it's like to maybe work locally, to work in these areas. But it's different to hear from someone really established, because that's really the goal for a lot of people when they're there, even if they never meet that goal, is that you want to be, in a lot of ways, this kind of like great artist. I mean, you spent your time looking at whoever it may be, Richard Serra, or you want to kind of achieve these things.
Known artists,
artists that are in books, people that write about it. And and I think it is good to hear from local artists and hear what it's like to actually try and live as an artist, try and make it. But that's basically all you get at guest degrees. And also, there's a real lack of push, and that you will go to guest degrees and there might be 10 people sitting in a big lecture theatre.
Now that could be a whole topic on its own you could discuss, like the idea of like how do you actually get people to come along.
How do you get people to come?
But
yeah, well, and that goes back to the idea, and this is something I really want to clear up. The reason that the Scott Sutherland School and the scene was that there was what's the Scott Sutherland? What is 5710?
It's the Architecture Society run by students.
Mind blank. Yeah, the Architecture Society. At Gray's, we don't have an art society. We do not have a society, and we've tried a few times. From my knowledge, it's failed a few times. And I think this goes back into the scene of art, in the push for art in Aberdeen. And it's very local, it's very small, and it seems to be more and more difficult to even get young artists, first year, second year, to even show up to exhibitions. You would expect in a place that has such little art going on for an entire, like really, if you're putting on an art exhibition, you would expect the entire art school to be there.
Not just your year.
Not just your year, the entire art school. I mean, there's such a lack of exhibitions that, when an exhibition comes along, it should be a big deal. It should be like, oh my god, even if it's the smallest exhibition, there should be people packed out to go see it because there's not anything else to see. And it's not there. Mm-hmm. And I think that applies to the talks, and there's just this lack of interest. And I think it might be a problem with the school. There's not a push. There really isn't a push for engagement. You can put posters up and stuff. Well, but trying to get lectures, for instance, and this isn't me bashing lectures, I'm just saying in general, it's kind of hard to get lectures to go into a classroom every day and be like, by the way, this is happening, please go to this. You hear a quiet mention of something every now and then, and the posters are like the only way you really, but the walls are covered in posters, so it's like, yeah, it's a weird thing at Gray's, and that you're kind of like a family, but like, it's like if you were to put on a meal for your family, and for everyone to come round, and then the reality is that 10 people come round because they're the only people that really care about the meal, but you've got a massive family. It's the same sort of thing, is that you put on the show and it's always the same people that show up.
Absolutely, yeah.
When in reality, your family extends to a much larger kind of audience than that. It's very weird the way that works.
And I mean, it's hard to get things going. And as a student, you have to be unbelievably motivated to do these things. Fortunate for me, the groundwork was already laid.
Right.
So, I mean, me and Hugh kind of inherited an already established, and not to make it sound ridiculous, like an institution, like it's some world-renowned thing. But it genuinely does have a good name, and we just had to invite who we wanted, and it was crazy to see how quickly the people would say yes. Or we don't pay the lecturers to come speak. We put them up for the night, we pay a meal, we take them out, we get them to socialise, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, you're not giving them an actual fee.
Yeah, and I think there's a good... It's strange because architecturally, I guess is what we're to talk about now in the post part of education, which would be nice to discuss, but there's not a massive scene or following outside of the university for architecture.
Yeah.
Having worked there, I can speak a little bit about this. And you know, we had 1 or 2 moments in my master's years where I was running the 5710,
Right.
where we had a member of the local architects practice, which there's numerous. It's not as if there's not
There's
a lot
yeah,
of them.
there's-
There's
yeah,
loads of them,
there's loads.
and maybe 1 or 2 people came, if that, in the entire year.
Yeah.
For people like Peter St. John of Crusoe St. John,
Yeah.
people like Brian McKay Lyons, from all the way from Canada, even people more
Jamie
local,
Folbert,
Jamie Folbert from
yeah.
London, Neil Gillespie speaking. Like, it's so strange to see that there's such little engagement from local practices, which is different because
Right.
I think art has its own following in a weird way, but architecture
Yeah, it's a separate
sometimes,
body.
yeah, exactly. It's, I don't know, if you like art, you're willing to go to these things. If you like architecture, somehow you're not willing to go to talks and stuff like that as much, I feel,
Yeah.
because you might think they're boring. But anyway, that one of the cons from the society would only be that there's not. It's an introverted society. It's mostly students, but it's massive, unlike that Grays
Yeah.
one.
I was going to talk about that,
But yeah.
just quickly before we move on to kind of reflection and things going on in our lives now and looking back at art school and things we've learned, those sorts of things. With 5710, I remember was it the first one I went to, I believe, was Nathan Coley, who is a very established artist, a Scottish artist.
Working at Glasgow.
Working at Glasgow. I mean, you've probably seen his work outside Edinburgh, the big signs, and he's a good artist. I think he's a good artist. People, you know, everyone has their opinions, but he's the biggest artist to come to Robert Gordon outside of Guest of Grays, and I think in general probably the most established artist we've had talk, bar like a Martin Creed or. But
Well,
that's
you've been there.
an odd thing to happen if you get a Martin Creed or something. Whereas for them to have someone of the establishment, like established as a Nathan Coley, even though he's not an architect, to go to 5710 is a normality to them. Whereas for us, it's like the enigma. It's like this one-off thing. If you can get someone like Martin Creed to come talk, or you know, we didn't get Nathan Coley, they did. It's like a one-off thing. You might get once a year or once every 2 years. Whereas if we had something in place to bring in these people, because Grays does actually have a good reputation, and his reputation is growing rapidly. I mean, really is. If you speak to people in other art schools, Grays has got a great reputation right now.
I mean,
Specifically, the painting department is doing really good.
It's probably a cycle of history, because I imagine that Grays did have a good reputation in the past. It's not to say it's been a rubbish school and it's suddenly getting better, but
No.
it's maybe recycling again, that
Yep.
maybe it's getting a better reputation in
Yeah.
Scotland.
Well, I know the painting school has got the painting side of Grays right now, and I didn't study painting, so this isn't me like I didn't study painting. It's got a really good reputation between all the schools in Scotland right now. Not to say it didn't have one, but it's really, really establishing itself, especially because of things going on in Glasgow, the school burning down, and just a lot of like lecturing strikes and stuff. It's the body of work coming out of that department year after year is really great. So I guess we've kind of covered that a bit. So now let's talk about kind of where we are post the north of Scotland.
Because it's weird, I think we talk about education as if we're still in it, but it's
Yeah,
done
we're
now.
not. Well, yeah, well, that's the interesting part. It's done.
Well, not for you.
I'm away to enter into it again. So I decided some point, I've been working in my studio here, that I wanted to do my masters. Now this is a personal thing for me, and that I write a lot. I write a lot of art criticism and theory, and I wanted my masters because I want to pursue that as well as my practice. And I think maybe at some point in my life might want to do some lecturing. I look up to artists like Larry Poons at the New York School. One of the great artists, living artists, who's still a lecturer to this day. You can do both. Contrary to belief, you can be a lecturer and an artist. You can be a critic and an artist. You can do it all. You don't have to be just one thing. And yeah, that's a personal thing. So I'm going back into it, but I'm going to Edinburgh to do my masters. So I'm going down to that central. And into the
scene.
the competitive nature, the scene, the culture, as people would call it. It's not London. It's Edinburgh, which is something you do have to preface. It's not London. London is its own thing. It's so unbelievably big in comparison to Edinburgh, which is big in its own right, but it's like you're dealing with something else. It's a monolith. So I'm going there. I'm going to see. I think in a lot of ways
With an
I'll
open mind.
an open mind to see what it's like, to see the differences. I know it's there. I've been to Edinburgh, and I know people that studied Edinburgh, but just to experience it, I think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be very different.
Definitely.
But for you,
I'm done.
You're
So
done.
it's more of a reflective thing for me.
Yeah.
And you know, I think when you start to get the distance from education, you start to, like my girlfriend currently is just graduating her bachelor's, and you know the things she worries about. I wonder if I was worried about the same things at that time, and I don't know if I was, but looking back on it, I definitely see the importance of teaching and education and how it's affected me, and maybe how it could be improved. Definitely at Scots, I think, and maybe some things we could talk about is in post looking at things, so adjustments that definitely bothered me about the environment at the school. And one was something that already came up, I think you mentioned it, was the tutor-student ratio.
right?
At undergraduate, at university, it's a joke, and we were in a small school.
Right.
70. So 70 people between 3 lecturers. That is why there's such a high dropout rate, fundamentally, I think. That nobody engages with the subject because you're not actually getting taught about it for a long time. You only get to spend 5 minutes with a tutor. But then at masters, I think it's taught really well. I think it's still stretched. We were a group of, I want to say 11, off the top of my head, I can't remember. So I apologise if I forget anyone. But we had a lecturer every 2 weeks at masters.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, and you sat down for maybe half an hour, and some people would be waiting all day to see a lecturer. I know, post 5 o'clock, and sometimes with a guest lecturer they'd be leaving as, you know, they get round to finally seeing the last person, so you only get the in-house lecturer and you don't get the benefit of seeing Neil. You would just see an in-house lecturer, which is good, but at the same time, you know, Neil's the guy running this unit. It's his opinion you want to hear. He's the visiting professor. He's such an accolade to the school. So I would say that's definitely one thing I would definitely force if I was in control of a fake university, say something like this.
Yeah.
I would limit the number of students very harshly in the master's level, and I know that's hard to do because of funding and university, blah blah blah. I don't know all the background.
Thinning the crops out, is it?
Thinning
It's not
out.
an easy thing to do, yeah.
But the benefits I think you would see from the students coming out of the school, if you wanted to raise the bar even further from a school that's not too competitive, but maybe get a little bit more competitive or get even better students, I think this is definitely something I would look to improve.
Right.
I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I agree with that, and I mean I seen it in my final year at Gray's, and I had my one-on-one, because you have your head of year, and our head of year was Jim Hamlin, who was a great lecturer, get along with really well, and something I respect about Jim is that he's a very strict person, and that he's up for a laugh and whatever, but he will sit down and he will really challenge you on your work, which I think a lot of lecturers seem to be afraid to do at our school. They think that everything's kind of okay to pass. Jim will really have a talk to you about your work, and he'll question you. He'll really try and get into the nitty gritty parts of it, and if you can't answer it, then you can't answer it. It's that simple, and I would really respect that. But my one-on-one lecturer, who actually was the person who accepted me into art school at the time, because at the time he was the head of the department, which is Michael Agnew, who's a great artist and a really good lecturer. But this is my problem that we were just talking about, is the amount of time you get to spend with these lecturers. I don't know how often we got bookings. And I'll be the first person to say I wasn't the first person to just book my time, but yes, I've got my time. Like I kind of just, booked it last minute, whatever time slot, because it doesn't really matter when you get your time slot, you're going to get it. And maybe I missed one every now and then, but when you're only getting a slot every month, every 2 weeks to a month or whatever you get, I mean, it might even be less than that now that I think about it. Where's the feedback? Except for the feedback loop between you and your fellow students, I guess.
It's good. I mean, you don't want mollycoddled it.
No, absolutely not. But you need to be challenged. And I think the less time you spend with a lecturer, the harder it is to be challenged, because fellow students find it very hard.
Yeah.
I personally didn't, which might have made me some enemies, but to criticise your fellow students is a hard thing. And I mean, really criticise them, not just be like, oh, maybe you could do this. Like, just, I don't really get, where you're coming from with your work. What is the point of it? Can you explain that to me? Not in a rude way, but you need a lecturer there to be like, why are you doing this? And I had it multiple times in my personal practice, because honestly, my practice was a bit of a mess in my last 2 years. It was, because I was trying to clear out a bunch of things in my head and to do with what I want, the direction of where my work was going, I
Mhm.
guess. So yeah, I think the time you spend in lectures is
I
the
think it's
biggest problem I have. And
a
then
nice point I could build on to is
Yeah.
like this harshness. I don't
Yeah.
think I've got it written down because it's so strange to say, but I was always very positive. I'm always amazed by what people can do. Like
Right.
I am the first person to be amazed by that. So my second point of what I could improve the skill with is a little bit of harshness, like you say.
yeah,
I think university should be a little bit scary, and
It
I
should-
was never. Once I understood it in master's level, I was
Yeah.
never particularly scared
mm,
because I think I could manage it because I was very interested in it and I was producing work and I might be a little last minute, but people shouldn't be passing for a master's degree.
mm,
And that may sound mental, but some people, even after 6 years of university,
yeah,
still don't get the architecture side of it.
right,
They really don't, and they may be able to make some okay engagement. They're a little bit critical of themselves, but it's not enough. And I feel that there needs to be a next level of harshness at university, which is obviously shunned upon just now in society.
In society,
I guess,
yeah,
and
it's-
across the board. You can't be mean to someone. You can't
yeah.
say they're wrong.
Yeah, university is a safe space, which is not what a university is. It's a place to challenge
And
ideas.
I don't want the return of like belts and
No,
I
nothing
don't
like
I
that.
don't want to be mental and bring back
No.
you're barely passing kind of idea, but people shouldn't be passing who genuinely can't defend their ideas
Yeah.
or they pin up something that isn't of standard. And I know it's a hard thing to judge standard because you try to standardize it, blah blah blah.
Mm.
But there's just some people, walking away with a master's degree the same as me, and it's just so hard to put your finger on like
Why?
why.
Yeah. And I think this is something I wanted to talk about briefly, which was the idea of if I was a lecturer, because at some point I might want to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Um,
everyone is. I am
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. One of the things I've always talked about is like a different way to grade architecture, and I've always talked about the idea that you can walk away. You're saying this. You can walk away with a good grade in art. Like I'll be the first one to say I didn't get the best grade, but I think
Neither, yeah.
the reason I didn't get the best grade, and this isn't me trying to go, no, genuinely, I kind of given up on a lot of for a lot of reasons on certain things to do with art school. But one of the things is that you can walk away with a master's or a bachelor's by meeting criteria, but not understanding the actual architecture aspect or the art aspect. So there's a grading matrix, and you meet you've written down all these things, you've done all this research, but you could not sit down. You could get a first, but then actually if someone was to sit down and try and talk to you about the practice and your engagement with architectural history or the things going on right now and the theory of it and why you want to make art and the engagement of the things around you, you can't do it. That's a problem because that's actually the thing that you need post.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem, is that you can do all the writing, you can do all the portfolio work, and
Reports,
then as
yeah.
soon as you get your first, and then as soon as you go into the art world, you can't go into a gallery and sell your work to a deal because you don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how to talk art, you don't know how to the engagement isn't there, the passion, the drive. Because that's not what you were doing. You were making work for someone rather than making it for yourself and trying to convince other people of why it's good. You were making it for a grading matrix.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely,
so I've always
yeah.
said one of the ways we could try and do grading better was like you do your grading matrix and then you sit down with each student and you talk to them about their practice.
That's the exam.
That's the exam, right? You sit and you talk to them about their practice, you talk to them about their ideas and their critical engagement, and whether you like it or not doesn't matter. It's whether they can talk about it, whether they can back up and argue their ideas and talk about their understanding of art history and contextual work.
And we get that to a certain degree in
Right.
architecture school with the
We
final
don't get
pin-up.
we don't get it in art.
Not enough, maybe.
Not enough.
But you do
No.
do it a little bit.
Yeah, a little
but
bit throughout the year, but you're not really graded on that.
I think for us that's definitely present. But
Right.
the thing that gets me is what you just said there is you talking about architecture. And
Right.
architecture is not something that's suddenly developed and like everyone, architecture is about houses. No, it's not. I mean, there's an in-depth history about it. And I think we
Right.
both wanted to quickly mention this because we're kind of wearing on a bit. But
Yeah.
it's about reading in university.
Yes.
And the death of it, in a
Ah.
sense. So
The death of learning.
death of
The
reading.
death of reading is a real thing.
And I'll be the first to say I'm not a big reader, but I'm trying to be now because I see it now that I've graduated that how important history
Right.
is. And to me, this is the main thing that people aren't learning at universities: history.
History.
And maybe it's the way we teach it. I'm not sure, but our exams in it were not a joke, but were laughable. You have to name dates and buildings in masters, where really you should be
knowledge and
like knowing history at the back of your hand. That's where it all comes from, you know.
And this is something that I wanted to briefly talk on. I think this is going to be the last thing we kind of talk about for this episode before we end it. It's like the books and stuff. I've always said that one of the things that we need to do in art schools, and maybe even this goes back all the way back to academy, you know, your high school. When you're studying art at high school, you know, you might read a book or whatever, but you need to be giving people books like, you know, I would say your first semester, maybe this needs to go back further, but your first semester in first year, here's your first semester, here's 2 books everyone has to read. The Shock of the New by Robert Hughes, and say, like, I don't know, Installation Art Critical History by Claire Bishop. Something like that. And then you start to specialise it and confine it down till 3rd year.
The reading list is a joke. You have a reading list, sure, some unis have them still, maybe we had them, but I was never quizzed on the reading list.
I don't mean like as in a reading list, I mean like you have to read these things, right? So because you may have to write something on them or whatever it may be, and that's something that's really lacking because you don't read things. I think you've always got this idea in your head that you're going to do something new, and maybe it's slightly different in architecture, but in art I really believe everything has been done to a certain extent, and that you're doing new adaptations of things, and you need to learn from your masters.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be walking around thinking that you are the new, you know, you're going to be Picasso or something, or Paul Cézanne, or you're not going to invent something new. But you can make new work. You just can't invent something new anymore. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Every material's been played with at this point. Every painting looks like another painting. You think you've done a new masterpiece. I guarantee you someone can tell you that your work looks like someone else's.
Yeah.
And you need to understand the context of that to be able to make something new, to be able to engage with it, to be able to express what you want to express. And go and look at that artist that maybe looks like and go, oh, that's interesting that that's what they were trying to put out with that work. And my work kind of similar, but it's on a different subject. So
it's about layers, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, it's always a new layer which references forward, but at the same time it's always got to go back. And I think that to get, I don't know, the best form of education, it still has to be about how you teach history.
Right, I agree with that. Yeah.
And at university, it might just be our example of it.
Yeah.
But now looking back as someone trying to make it in the working world, you notice the effects of it, where there's no talk of history in offices in, say, Aberdeen where I worked. Nobody references the greats. Nobody talks about anything like that. It's about commercial stuff and blah, blah, blah stuff. And we made it go that way because that's what we decided the culture was. It wasn't discussing great work and making good architecture.
Right. So.
But yeah, we're running out of time.
Getting a blend there, but so that was the first episode. I'm sure we'll iron out the kinks and everything will start to flow a little bit better. Might have been a bit of a mundane episode for some people, but I think it was something really important for us to talk about. And we'll probably start specialising on specific topics or artists or whatever may come. But that was the first episode. I hope it went fine.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Giving it a go and seeing how it got on.
And we're going to have our first so many episodes out, and then we'll see what happens after that. So
so thanks anyway.
Cheers.